This is Lisa Dickinson, Garden Girl at 2 Peas in a Bucket, with this week's Scene Double video. On this episode, I'm working with 2 acrylic stencils and spray mist, and I'll be creating a double page layout and a coordinating card. I like the idea of adding mist to my pages, but I find it's really difficult to control it. I've ruined a lot of cardstock while experimenting. That's why I love acrylic stencils or masks. They let you have a lot of control over how the mist goes on your page, and you'll end up having less mistakes using them versus just using mist alone. Today I'm using 2 new stencils from Prima, a 6x6 camera design and a 12x12 camera pattern. I've also selected a dark gray and an aqua spray ink by Studio Calico that will coordinate with these cardstock colors of white and teal. To start, I'm going to create a pattern background on one of my cardstock pieces using the 12x12 stencil. I'm going to spray it inside this cardboard box to try to contain the mist somewhat. So I'll just layer the stencil over the cardstock, and then I like to add a little bit of tape around the edges just to keep the stencil from moving, and it'll help keep the ink from smearing. I'm going to be using the Studio Calico Mr. Huey in Warm Calico, which is kind of a dark charcoal gray. And since this is a fairly detailed stencil, I'm going to apply the mist pretty generously just to make sure I cover all of the little holes. Once I'm done spraying, I like to use a paper towel to dab off the excess ink so it doesn't run underneath the mask when I go to pull it off. And once I've gotten all of that dabbed up, then I will gently pull up the stencil to reveal the misted pattern. So now I've got the background for the right side of my 2-page spread. On the left side, I've chosen a white cardstock, and I'm planning to repeat the camera theme. But on this side, I will use a 6x6 stencil, which features just one of the camera designs from the 12x12 stencil, but it's at a larger size. This repetition of images should help tie the 2 halves of my layout together. To keep the stencil in place while I spray it, I'll apply some temporary adhesive and adhere it where I want the camera design to be on the white cardstock. Then I'll place this sheet back into the spray box and mask off around the edges so they don't get sprayed. I've just cut up some scrap cardstock to protect the white background. I'm going to stick it down with a little bit of Scotch tape so that it doesn't move when I spray it. Then I'm going to use the water cooler color from Studio Calico, which is a dark aqua, to do my first coat. Once I've done that, I'll dab it off and do one more coat just to darken the color a little bit. So here's the result. The misted image is a little bit fuzzy, which is kind of the nature of mist, but I want to sharpen it up a little bit with some black lowlights. I've cleaned off my stencil with water and then dried it, and I'm going to use temporary adhesive to position it just slightly offset from the original image. Then with a felt tip pen, this one is an American Crafts Slick Writer and it's a medium point, I'm going to add some outlines just to define the camera a little bit more. Then I'll remove the stencil and you can see how just a little bit of black really adds definition and detail to the image. I just need to get some of this temporary adhesive off with my eraser and I'm ready to start building the layout. I'm going to incorporate 14 square photos on this spread that I took over the course of the last year in photo booth. I'm thinking I'll arrange about 12 of them on the right-hand side and then have 2 or 3 on the left-hand side with a title and my journaling. I'm just going to roughly lay them out to get an idea of how I want to arrange them. Now that I have an idea of where the photos will go, I'm thinking of where to add my journaling and title. I'd like to bring some of the colors from the photos onto the left side of the spread with a bold title, and I think my journaling block will fit in the lower left corner. So I'm going to type up my journaling and print it on the background cardstock now. I ended up printing my journaling horizontally below the camera, and I left room for the title above it. I'm adding in 2 photos that match the size of the photos from the right, and I've decided I want to title the page Photo Booth, since that's what I use to take all of these photos. So I went ahead and I die cut the word photo on my silhouette using a Dear Lizzy Lucky Charm paper in a coral polka dot. And I picked that pattern out because it kind of ties in to some of the coral in the photos on the right. To spell out the word booth, I've picked out these hardcover thickers in a thin black, which will contrast nicely with the bolder script of the word photo. There's a lot going on the right side of the spread, so I'd like to add something else over here on the left to balance it out. I thought I'd try to incorporate a few of these die cuts from the Dear Lizzy Lucky Charm line. I'm just going to play with some of these shapes and colors and see what works. I like the way this yellow circle fits into the camera lens. And the star pulls in some of the aqua from the other side of the page. Now I'm shifting my focus over to the right side of the page where I don't have a lot of details yet. I'd like to add some of the pattern and color from my title block into this photo arrangement. I've cut out a few squares of the Dear Lizzy Lucky Charm papers, just a bit larger than my photos. And I'm going to tuck them in behind some of the photos just to break the block up a little bit. I've also cut a thin strip of this chevron paper because I think it will work below my journaling to help lead the eye over to the right and just connect the 2 halves of the layout. Now I'm ready to embellish the page, so I've pulled out some options. I've got chipboard arrows and cameras from the Studio Calico Snippets line. I've also grabbed some brads from that same line, as well as some of the tiny buttons from the Dear Lizzy Lucky Charm collection. Since the layout's about taking photos, I'm going to reinforce that photo theme by adding a few of these chipboard cameras to the right side. I really like the way that these brads will kind of fit into the center of the chipboard cameras, and it adds just a little bit of sparkle and texture to that chipboard. While I'm arranging my embellishments, I'm keeping in mind the design concept of a visual triangle by creating 3 clusters of accents, 2 on the right and then 1 over on the left by my title. Doing that will help lead the eye to each area of the layout. At this point, I think the arrangement looks pretty good, so I'm just going to adhere everything down. And here's the completed spread. For my second seam double project, I'm going to make a card using the 12 by 12 stencil. I just want to mist one of the camera images, so I'm going to mask off the rest of them with this sheet of chipboard that I cut to cover all but one camera. Once that's in place, I will mist it with the warm calico ink. I've cut down the piece of cardstock to about 5 inches by 3.5 inches. I'm going to add a little bit of highlighting using the stencil and an opaque white pen. I'm just going to line it up a little bit offset from the original image, and then I'll use it as a guide to make my white pen marks. You don't have to trace every single area, just some of the larger ones, and the result will be an image that has a little more detail and sharpness to it. Now I'm going to add the sentiment to my card, so I've grabbed some stamps. This is the Studio Calico Wesley Alpha, and it's a really great bold uppercase alphabet that's good for titles. It's also on sale for 50% off right now, so if you need a good stamp set, go grab those in the two-piece store. I'm using Stays On ink in jet black because it's a nice saturated black and it works really well on darker tones of cardstock. Now that I see my dark black stamping next to the camera image, I'm thinking I want to add some dark lowlights to the camera as well. So just like I did with a white pen, I'm going to use the stencil to add some lowlights with a black pen. I'm using the American Crafts Slick Writer with a medium tip, and that'll just add a few crisp lines to the misted image. Now I'm ready to assemble and embellish my card. So I've got a white base that I will adhere my camera image to. Then I'd like to add a brad to the center of the camera like I did on my layout, but I probably should have done that before I adhered it. So luckily I'm using temporary adhesive and I can remove it, apply my brad, and then stick it back down. Then I'm going to add a strip of the striped Dear Lizzy paper to the bottom of the card, just to add a little bit of color. And I've printed the rest of my sentiment, which says "We Just," and it's going to go right in front of the stamped word "click." Then I'd like to add one of these chipboard arrows just to add a little bit of red to the card, but I'm not sure exactly where it would go best. I'm thinking maybe in place of the I in "click." I like the way that looks. I think I'm going to go with that. The last thing I did was add a stitched border around the edge of the card. And here's a look at it totally complete. Thanks for joining me for this seam double video. I hope you've enjoyed it and that you're inspired to try out some of these misting and stenciling techniques on your next project. For more information on seam double and other video series, please visit www.twopeasinabucket.com and click on the Videos tab.